Hello, this is Will Faber from Art to Ride, and today we're going to focus on a sitting trot lesson with Barb. Now, Barb is the owner of Perhaps now. Perhaps was Karen's intermediate horse. She showed her successfully through intermediate. She won her silver medal on the horse. And we passed her on to Barb a few years ago. She'd had a little downtime as the first home that we tried to find for Perhaps just didn't work out for her. And so we took her back and gave her to Barb, who is now doing wonderfully with her. Perhaps is now 21 years old. She's completely sound. She's been shown through intermediate, as I said. And she's kind of our lovely schoolmaster for anyone coming to town who wants to feel a little piaffe and passage and these kinds of things, as she's been trained through Grand Prix. So she now belongs to Barb, who's doing wonderfully with her. And Barb has, like many sports people, developed a few issues. She's an avid skier, and she's hiked the trail here that goes from coast to coast and that sort of thing. And a lot of us who are very athletic, one of the most difficult things is keeping from injuring ourselves. So Barb had some difficulties with the sitting trot that we're just now beginning to work through after a few years. She experienced a great deal of pain in her hips, and she could tell you more about that, but she's been working very studiously with a chiropractor and body workers helping her as we help the horse. So the idea of learning to sitting to trot, it should never hurt you and it should never hurt the horse. So that means right off the bat, the idea is that you can't be doing this on horses that are hollow in the back, because it will only destroy them, and it will also destroy your hips, by the way, because if the horse doesn't come up and support you, it puts a great deal of pressure inside your hips, especially if you hold against your hands. So as we begin to first learn to sit to the trot, the issue is we have to do it without any contact. So be sure that at the first that we can sit quietly without taking back on the mouth of the horse. So what you just saw her happen there coming down the long side is that we began that work. Now, we're going to see this a little bit in reverse today, because I'm showing you where we ended up, and then we're going to show you where we started and work up to this point on this video. By the way, this was done on the new solo shot, by the way. We're just beginning to experiment with it and having some good luck. I mean, it really is a wonderful machine, and so far it's living up to all our expectations, as you can see here, once we got through exactly how to set it and that sort of thing. So you can see how we'll keep coming back to the stretch throughout this workout with this horse, because that we have to relieve that tension across the back. So once we get a nice swinging trot like that, you can clearly see there that her top line is nicely lit up. It's not a huge stride. Now, Perhaps is only a 15 two-hand horse. She's half thoroughbred, half Westphalian. She's not one of these giant movers. She, like many of the ones that you see us working with, she was fairly straight behind and didn't have the kind of, natural built-in flexion that some of the horses have today. That is what people are getting by on. But you can see now that she moves her hocks quite actively. There's a nice swing through her back. She engages across her top line. And so after Barb doing that sitting trot work, we've come back to the stretch work here to loosen her back again. So same thing. We see so many riders getting lessons by trainers on the ends of lunge lines, for instance. There is nothing worse that you can do for yourself or your horse is to have a lesson on a hollow-backed horse on the end of a lunge line for an hour at a time till you are screaming in pain and the horse is probably internally screaming in pain. So you want to sit to the trot for just short periods of time, and you'll notice that I have the rider with stirrups. Unless you have a 15-year-old schoolmaster with a perfectly balanced back that you can put on and you can go for longer periods of time on, and that takes quite a lot of skill. So here she came down the center line and did a nice halt. So that's where we ended. So you can see by the end of that, she got quite soft in the saddle. She wasn't pulling back on the reins, wasn't asking for a very high level of frame there in that, but the amount that she could sit to and not interrupt the horse's stride. So she's just finished there, and she would now just take the horse and walk it out. So I'm going to show you where we started and how we got to that place. You can see Barb being a little stiff, getting off there, taking her time. But Barb has really done a wonderful job. She's so committed. She and I are about the same age. I won't disclose her age, but not that she would care, I don't think. But know that she and I are about the same age, and she's in wonderful shape. And that's the whole trick, whether you are a person or you're training a horse. This horse is 21 years old, which in horse years would be about the same age as that we are. And you see the horse is, the horse isn't at its top level performance, but it can be. We let this horse, go at the level. There's no need for her to do a lot of collection every day, because that's not what Barb is ready to do, but that's what we're working towards here. So now we're back at the beginning of that session where we started. And as always, we start out in that stretch. We're always looking to get the horse completely stretched out And even if you see us bringing the horse up and down a few times, we're always looking, as soon as I feel the horse tense, we're letting the stretch back down again. Now, of course, the argument that you have all heard is this thing about, oh, if the horse's head is down, it's on the forehand. But I'm hoping what we have shown you folks is that there's nothing more erroneous than that. The head has, in fact, if the head is not down to the right position, the back simply can never come up. So people have to learn the difference between just a horse having its head up in the air and actually being on the forehand or not. So here she's beginning to work. Now, Barb is just beginning to work in the half pass with this horse. And she's beginning to have the coordination to keep that inside leg where it needs to be without tensing it while bringing the outside leg back. So for her just beginning in this exercise, that was quite good. So notice but it did begin to slow the horse down a little bit as she began to coordinate between her hands and her legs. And you can see how sometimes she had to use a little bit too much hand, and that began to slow the horse down a little bit. So we come right back to that stretch, and we always come back as soon as we feel that we've lost that swing over the back. We come right back to the stretch again. Now this tape, due to we're just working out this solo shot, just so you guys know, there was a lot more of this walk work, but the solo shot seems to be making its own edit at times. So I haven't quite figured out exactly how to do that. It seems to go on and off at times, and I'm just not curious what's causing that. But we seem to miss some little parts. I'm thinking it might have something to do with the movement of the armband. But so we still are working out a few solo shot issues. So once again, after that walk work, she was just now started the trot work. And notice she goes right down and into that stretch, really lovely. Now, one of the things that's really made a big difference for Barb is she is just now changed to the Peter Horobin saddle. And like everybody who's tried these saddles, we're just amazed at how much better the horses are going and how much better the riders. What I'm really pleased with these Horobin saddles that I didn't see in any of the other saddles that we liked a lot, because they were doing the right things for the horses, but they weren't bringing the seat of the rider close enough to the withers. So Mr. Horobin seems to have figured out how to make that happen. So Barb in her last saddle sat quite in a chair seat, and now she's only been in this saddle for a couple of days here, but you can see how nicely her leg is now getting back underneath her. And if you go back, we haven't done a lot of videos of Barb with this horse yet. She was just developing to this point, and I'm feeling really now that she's really beginning to, it's all coming together for her, if you will, and dealing with the physical problems that she had when she started. So she's been riding perhaps, I think, about 3 years now it's been, maybe even going on 4. And once again, the horse is 21 years old, and that's the beauty of it. When you think about today, most people, 4 years, their horse is finished, which is kind of how people have begun to think of horses. So here's this one. Barb is being able to really, not that she didn't know how to ride before she started, but she had not developed into the kind of rider that she wanted to be, which is what we see her doing here. And once again, with having ridden this horse now for 3 or 4 years, the horse is only just getting better and better and better. And as Barb is getting better, the horse is getting back to the level that she needs to be to perform the more upper level movements. And that's coming back beautifully for her after being let down for a little while. Remember, collection is a level of physical fitness that's attained that allows it to happen. And if you lose some level of physical fitness, as this horse did, when she was let down for a couple of years there, they're going to lose that ability. So it's not something, collection is never a trick that once the horse learns it, it's just going to be able to do it. It's dependent on the strength of the top line. The horse loses all that strength in the top line through illness or whatever, lack of work. You always have to go back and sort of start again, if you will. Now, if the horse has learned it all, it comes back much more quickly. But there is still that issue. And this horse, nowhere nearly gets the level of collection that she did at the height of her show career. But there's nothing wrong with her, and she certainly will be able to do that again, as that becomes something that Barb needs to be able to do, which she's just now starting to get that place where she's able to begin to sit to the trot and begin to develop the horse up into the higher levels of the trot collected work, which you can't really do in a rising trot only, or would be very difficult. So as we watch this workout go through, you notice how the horse keeps that beautiful big swinging stride. Now, what Barb is trying to do here now is just settle her into a good working position where she's has contact stretching into the contact with the bridle. There she's doing a little bit of lengthening stride, just bringing the horse through to her hand. And how nicely that came. So here she brings her back up a little bit. You see there's a little bit of struggle. the horse begins to slow a little bit behind, but then she allows her to lower, and she goes into a little bit of shoulder in here, and that helps her. Remember what the shoulder in does. The only reason to do a shoulder in is to engage the back. It has no other purpose than that. That's what it's for. I mean, people have kind of begun to think of some of these dressage movements as an end unto themselves because they do them in shows. But, you know, as someone once pointed out to me, if the horse isn't gaining impulsion through the shoulder in, but you're losing impulsion, you're not really doing the shoulder in right. That's the point of the shoulder in, is to help you re-engage that back, just like all the work in hand that we do. So we also want to limit that. It's more important that the horse get over its back, and once it's over its back, we don't need to keep doing shoulder in after shoulder in after shoulder in. The shoulder in should be used as all the lateral work. Once they can do that, then you can begin to move into it. And the half pass even demands a stronger lift of that, what is now the outside leg, which now the outside leg has to come under the body and push upwards, which is much harder than that inside leg on the side of the bend more naturally steps underneath the body, which is why we start with that. But once again, all these exercises have a reason. There's a reason that we do them. You know, it's not like a turn in the forehand. We teach a horse to turn in the forehand so we can open and close a gate, is how they used to think of it, you know. So everybody used to always do that because a lot of people used to have open gates on horses, you know. Unless you're somebody out hunting, you know, not many people have the kind of places where we can ride where there are gates to open anymore. So coming up here into the shoulder in, you see she gets a little tight on her there, so she tries to give her a little tap with the whip, and she gets the swing a little bigger. And once again, you notice the top line is lit up, but she's not overly flexed in the jaw and pull. But the movement kept going. So remember, that's the more important thing. It's not whether the head and neck is up and down, it's whether the movement of the horse stays the same, whether it is up or down. Now she asks for a little lengthening there, once again asking the horse to swing a little deeper under the body. Barb and perhaps have really become a lovely couple, if you will, here in the last period of time. And I expect there's going to be many, many more good years together. So think about it this way, you know, if you read any good book on dressage, like Klaus Bachenholz, he talks about students should be under instruction for 5 years, that it takes 5 years of daily work to begin, you know, to know what you're doing with this work. And I think that's part of the problem, that many people, without enough guidance, left on their own, and especially as the shows begin to dumb down the requirements of dressage, it's made a lot of people feel like they know what they're doing, and it's giving them the kudos to go and do more of it. And that's the really sad thing about the show ring, is that it has become the thing that's encouraging more bad riding than anything else, rather than, you know, we should think of going to show and watching, you know, everybody would go, you know, if a Grand Prix horse was in town, everybody interested in dressage went and watched it. Nowadays, oh ho hum, it's just another Grand Prix horse, you know. And of course, we feel that way about it because most of them are upside down, you know, so it doesn't look like anything. So here she sits in that strut. Now notice how loose her back is. There's still a little bit of a bounce to her. And notice how she's just got, her leg is still just a little bit tight. You can see how it starts to float up out of the saddle. So when you're sitting, if you feel like your stirrup begins to float up, or your leg begins to float up out of the stirrup, that tells you that you're gripping with the top part of your body. And, you know, no matter how loose you think you are in the saddle, you know, I guarantee you, until you've been doing this for a long, long time, that, you know, you're tighter than you think you are. For me, what brought it to me was riding a horse of Mr. Oliveira's that had bucked off everybody in the school, and he put me on this horse, and if you touched it with your leg, it would just jump straight in the air, go like 5 feet in the air off of all 4 legs, straight into the air. And if you tried to do a flying change, if your leg gripped at all, that's what the horse would do, and he had bucked off pretty much everybody. And he had me do flying changes on this horse. It must have been an hour, it seems like, and well, by the end of it, my legs were so relaxed, and I realized now my legs are really relaxed. So look here, now you can see that she's getting a little behind the motion, and that's all right. Like going back over that ball, she made her seat a little bit lighter, but her hips are still moving nicely, and the horse is still swinging nicely underneath itself. So, but it started to slow down there and get a little bit slow, so we come right back in. Once again, reestablish that wave. Imagine it's like your surfer. You can look at the source when the camera kind of backs off like that. You can see how it looks like a big ball rolling over the ground. You can literally see the wave lifting her up in the middle of the horse's back like that, like the wave coming to shore, and it just keeps, we have to refresh that wave if it starts to break down so that we can stay up on our board, so to speak. I spent a lot of time in California watching surfers, but it really makes sense when you watch a surfer and realize how, the wave of energy that's moving, the sphere of energy that moves through the water that creates the wave is very much the same thing here. And it really does feel like that when you experience that for the first time. You go, wow, this horse is like lifting me up, and I don't feel like earthbound. So many riders have horses that lift their legs way up, but they still look very earthbound because that's all they're doing is lifting their legs up. They're not pushing their bodies upwards. So we're getting into the canter here now, which has also been a very good thing for Barb in the very beginning. We did a lot of canter because she could sit to the canter, and it kind of loosened her up a little bit, which is exactly why we're doing it here. Now remember what you saw at the end is the end of this tape. So we started kind of at the end, so you can see kind of where she ended up and how we got to that place. So here, notice she's getting up in a 2-point position, which is what everyone should do. And once again, I want to talk about these Peter Horben saddles, because in the saddles we were using before these, I could never get up in a 2-point position. It just didn't feel balanced. And the Peter Horben saddles, in the dressage saddles, you can just get right up in a 2-point position, get up over the horse's back. Now you can see there, with perhaps, she does flying changes every stride in 2 and 3s and 4s and whatever you like. So if you move your leg, start moving it a little, she'll start doing flying changes. Now notice she doesn't get upset about it, but if the rider doesn't keep themselves in the right position, she's going to do that flying change if the person loses control of their leg position. So a horse like that will really teach you. Now look here in that 2-point. Now you can imagine if you were a polo player or going down to a jump, that's how you'd like to arrive at a jump. A horse cantering over its back with very little change of tempo. Or if you were hitting a polo mount, like when you see her when she gets round like that, you notice there's not a lot of seesawing up and down movement in the canter, and there shouldn't be. We hear people in dressage today talking about how the canter should feel like a rocking horse. Well, if it feels like a rocking horse, folks, your horse is completely hollow. But no, it should feel like a wave that just keeps repeating itself. In other words, before you drop all the way into the hole, it repeats itself underneath you and brings you back up. Whereas a horse that's hollow in the back does it goes up behind and then up in front and then down behind like a teeter-totter. It shouldn't feel like a teeter-totter. Now you can see Barb here beginning to ask to sort of come into a little more of a working frame and testing her ability to keep her hands quiet without a lot of backwards pressure. And she does quite a nice job. You see what a nice big open stride she got there before the canter work, and how the horse just stepped right into that canter there. And once again, how nicely the horse is cantering over her back. Notice there's not a lot of up and down movement in the canter. It looks like a big ball. And you can see how the top of the horse's neck. Now watch, if you start watching racehorses, the great racehorses run exactly like that, only they're in a gallop. You don't see a lot of the underside of their neck. So this is true of any kind of horses that you're training. If you see a thick underside of the neck, the horse is never doing what it could possibly do, because it's really just jumping or running off of its front end rather than motivating itself through from the back end. So once again, how nice and balanced she goes through that corner there. And back up in a little bit of a 2-point. Now notice that the back even gets a little rounder. She releases it a little bit. That's why we have to keep coming back and opening up the gates. Always remember that dressage really wasn't what we think of dressage, really until the late 1800s and 1900s. As the great cross-country riders. Now there she got a beautiful clean flying change. Notice there was no change. So now she's going to come back and do the counter canter in this direction. And the goal here with her, she'd always kind of be slowing down a little bit, but this was a really good day. She was able to keep this counter canter flowing. There should be no change in the rhythm of the horse. You can see how difficult it is as it makes this change in the other direction, how it really has to struggle a little bit there to keep underneath itself, almost falls out. So the goal there would have been for have that last bit of that circle to be like the first part was, with no change in the rhythm. But she stalled a little bit, but she was able to correct herself right there. And once again, she comes back up into that 2-point, gets off the horse's back a little bit and lets the back swing back through before she sits down again. Every rider should know how to do a 2-point position. Many times that we want to get off the horse's back. So now she's going to come and do the flying change in this direction. Now you see what happened there is that her timing wasn't right, so the horse changed in front and then changed behind. So she comes back. Notice we don't punish the horse. That was the rider's fault. It wasn't the horse's fault. The rider got the timing wrong. Remember, the time to ask for the flying change is the split second after the third beat of the canter. So 1, 2, 3, change, like that. Or if you were counting in 1 and 2 and 3 and, like that. It'd be on the and of 3 in a musical sense. So she's going to come around and try that again. Once again, she tries to get the horse swinging over the back. And you'll see here that once again, she just doesn't quite get the timing right. And that came pretty nicely through that time. That's the one we were looking for, actually. So that was good. So we come back to the stretch. So you see how that very last one, everything was right at the right speed. But there maybe was a slight hesitation behind. Now watch it this time, and it's going to be absolutely perfect. Watch the horse jump up into the change. There, you see that? Very, very nice. And the rider got everything right on time. Look how nicely the horse is still over its back in the canter. And so we come back and stretch. Now, had she made a mistake again, that would have been all we would do. We never go back. I mean, I call 3 times my charm. If we don't get it by the 3rd time, we're probably not going to get it that day. And we move back to something that we know will help the horse get it the next time. So you just got to remember that, once the horse gets to where it's working for you and working with you in the kind of way that these horses do when we train like this, is that, it's never really their fault if something goes wrong. It's either the timing of the rider or the rider's the degree of preparation that the rider did. So we come back here to end. I just have Barb come and just do a little more sitting trot here. And you can see that she's a little unsteady up there, but she gets the horse back into the stretch. And notice that as soon as the horse gets back in the stretch, she can reach really far underneath herself and flex those hocks. And all of a sudden you see there where there's a little more spring beginning to happen in the stride. Just like that. So that's how we got to here. So you can see there she has her arms, her reins are a little bit long, but that's okay. I would rather at this point she stretch those reins, rather than if she had tightened to try to sort of keep the horse in the frame, if you will, to kick the horse back up through, she would have just lost it. So she was much better to do that, let it stretch. And notice we came, as soon as we saw it stalling out right there, then we come right back to the rising trot. And we get the horse swinging and active again. So you can see now we're getting a little higher level working trot now. Pole is beginning to come a little higher, and yet we're keeping that same level of trot. The horse lifting up and pushing through the back and getting the front end out of the way. And we're back to the stretch and the trot. Now we're going to pick it up again from where we first started looking at this tape. So here we are again, back to the first clip that we saw. Thank you, Solo Shot, for making these edits for me. Anybody has any advice or ideas that you've come up with if you're having this experience with the solo shots of it going on and off on its own, let me know. Karen thinks it might have something to do with the GPS, losing the GPS signal. So we can see here as she's set to the trot, how the horse really came underneath her that time. Now look how much more spring she has underneath her, as she was able to that time put her leg on and bring the horse up into a much more, what we would call a working frame. Almost a little bit collected there. Now she goes into the shoulder in. So once again, we can see here how how Barb has to bring her shoulders back. She kind of let it fade a little too much, and then she had to work a little bit too hard to try to get it back. But there she starts there. The horse starts to come up a little bit, but it got too tight, so that's why I had her come right back to the stretch again. And that's what you want to do. If you get to that point where you feel things lock up against you, just release it all and let it go back in the stretch. The stretch just releases all of that tension in the mouth of the horse that begins to build up when we don't quite get it all the way there. And that is the part of the process that we go through. I mean, sometimes it isn't perfect. And we try things, but we rarely get things perfectly in the very beginning anyway. So here she sits again. Now you can see how lovely. Now this time the horse came up underneath her. See how the horse started to float upwards a little bit. Now she kind of goes into the shoulder in there. And once again, as I talked about before, as you know, you're getting better at shoulder in when your horse should get more lift out of the shoulder in rather than less. But you can still see Barb is just a little bit uncoordinated there, trying to put it all together. So did she get the benefit of that shoulder in? Probably not that particular time, which is why I immediately had her come back to the stretch. So it takes a great deal to be able to go into these lateral movements and keep yourself relaxed enough that you don't stiffen up against the stride, and of course that sets a stiffness up in the body of the horse. But the big takeaway here for all of you is just how we keep coming. We do only very little periods of sitting trot. And once again, always with the stirrups. I only would work without stirrups on horses with very, very well-developed backs that could stand to go for 20 minutes at a time, without no stirrups, without it killing their back. So that's what you've got to realize. It takes a very, very strong, well-schooled horse to be able to do that with. And the other issue that I discovered as I learned it myself and taught it to other people, people learn to ride with no stirrups, and then they get stirrups, and they have to completely learn to ride all over again because it's completely different. So while I see the point in it, I'm not saying that one should never sit to the trot without stirrups, but once again, never at the expense of the horse. So, and it's always that difficulty once you learn to relax. So I think we have to take the approach in the modern world where we don't have all these lovely school horses to get on, that we do the best we can for ourselves and the horse. Once again, remembering it should never hurt. If you sit to the trot and it hurts, don't sit to the trot. It's probably hurting you and it's probably hurting the horse, and it will really only lead to bad things in the end. So here, once again, she goes back in the saddle and she tries to coordinate her hand there a little bit. You can see the horse beginning. She didn't get that just fantastic lift, but by the end of the long side there, she's been able to ask the horse to come back up underneath her. And we can see the horse stays quite round. There's a little skip there, but nice turn onto the center line, good bending. And comes down, she's going to stretch up and shows how to do a correct halt by just stretching her upper body. Notice she never dropped into the saddle. Great job. Barb, and perhaps this is Will Faber from Art to Ride. Hope that helps with your sitting trot at home.